full name?
Alan Bernard Banks, Sr.
And why did they give you that name?
Well, my grandfather, Norman Banks Sr., his father was Alfonso, and he had a twin brother named Alonzo. So I think they kind of compromised because my mother said her favorite actor was Alan Ladd. So that's why you got the A-L-A-N spelling. So I presume that the compromise was there. So I just go with saying I was named after my great-grandparent on my father, on the Banks side.
So that was your mother's, your father's grandfather.
Yeah, Alfonso Banks. Yeah.
Okay. Any nicknames?
Mostly my buddies always call me AB. You know, they call me AB all the way through AB. You know, I had a few other nicknames, but AB is the one that pretty much stuck.
Okay. And are you officially the AB? I heard some stories about AB number 1 or number 2. I think maybe you thought you was 1 at one point. And
No, Uncle Arnold thought he was number 1, and I thought I was number 2. But then you just think back to Alfonso Banks, then that has to be the logical number 1, and pushed Arnold to number 2 and pushed me to number 3. So I'm actually an AB number 3 when it comes down to that.
Okay. All right. And when and where were you born?
I was born in 1961 in San Francisco, California, in the back of my grandfather's Chevrolet on the way to Letterman's General Hospital in San Francisco, in the Presidio.
Okay. You want to elaborate a little bit on that? I think this story's been told before, but
yeah. Well, my grandfather actually delivered me. You know, they said they got around to the gate, and the gate was closed, and and before they can drive around to the other gate that was open, I just came, and he delivered me. And the ironic part about that is, I fed him his last meal in life, and so he delivered me, and I fed him his last meal. So I kind of think that's symbolic in a way that it just goes to show the type of relationship that we had growing up. You know, I was always there. He always came to take me to Sunday school and taught me about baseball and fishing and a lot of key values in life. So.
And when you say your grandfather, that's your grandfather on
Randolph, my mother's father. Okay. Elijah Randolph.
Okay, great. All right. How did your family come here to live?
Well, our family was just like most of the African American families that came to the West Coast. They came out here in the war effort in the 40s. My grandfather Banks and my grandfather Randolph both came out ahead of their wives because Kaiser Steel was shipping out, needing labor to build the ships for World War II. So my grandparents on my father's side, the Banks, they came from St. Louis in 1942, and then my grandmother, my mother's mother and father, they came out in the 40s also, and they ended up living 2 doors down from each other on Lover Street, and that's how my mother and my father met.
Yeah.
But they basically came out to build ships in the shipyard, Mare Island, and all the naval bases that were prevalent in the 40s in the San Francisco Bay Area. Came out mainly for work.
And this history is positively displayed on BanksEnterprise.org. For those who don't know, on the Family Legacy page, there's more detail. All right. Tell me about when you were first born. What house or apartment do you remember being born in?
I was born at 506 Alamany. It's in the project. Well, it wasn't a project at the time. It was Air Force housing because my dad was in Norman Banks Jr. was in the Air Force at the time. And shortly after we lived there, it turned into public housing. But I was born in 506 Alamany, which is now the Alamany Projects. And I still see the house that I was born in every day when we drive by there. And we lived there till I was approximately in the 3rd grade.
Okay. What was your earliest childhood memory?
My earliest childhood memory would be over in Alamany, you know, running around at St. Mary's Park, playing basketball. My first basket I ever made, I made at St. Mary's gym. My first hit I ever got in a baseball game was at St. Mary's. You know, I remember Greg Larry, who unfortunately passed away. He drowned when we went on a camping trip. We used to always go camping with the Larrys and a few of the other families. you know, I just remember, you know, good times, you know, going to Paul Revere Elementary School, you know, just being young and having a good time. That's basically what I remember about the Alameda project.
Okay, great. Can you, I know there's two sides of your family, on your mother's side and on your father's side. Can you run down, first on your mother's side, your siblings, and then on your father's side?
My brothers and my mother and my father were married in 1959, and they had 4 boys between them. The oldest being my brother Norman, the third, and then myself, and then Doug was born in 1964, and then Dave was born in 1965. And then my father went on to remarry twice, and he had other siblings, and which Tanya, and then Saladin, and then he married. When that was from Connie, he married Connie, and then after he married Connie, he married Lindia, and then that's where my other brothers came in. Andre was Lindia's son already, but you know, he was like, when we were young, me and Andre were like ace coon boom, so you know, I consider him one of the crew. And then after that, Maisha was born, and then Larry, and then Abraham. And so there's like 9 of us, but if you add us all up, with including Carlos, Adrian, Drina, and Cinnamon, and that bumps us up to 13, you know, altogether. So we consider ourselves 13. Yeah, well, I always felt that, I describe it in different ways, but I felt like if the Banks were on television, they'd be a motion picture, you know what I mean? And then I always felt like if the Randolphs were on television, they'd be a precise documentary with a lot of information, and you know what I mean? And you know, that's just the take I put on it, because you know, the Banks are a little bit more flamboyant, you know, a little bit more, you know, I wouldn't say proud, but they, you know, they speak more of themselves, and the Randolphs are a little bit more reserved and a little bit more humble, but you know, both good in their own ways, and I took from both sides to make me who I am, because you have to be a little bit out there sometimes. You have to let them know you're there, and then other times you do have to be humble and take the lower key. But as far as Banks is concerned, Banks are very confident people, always athletic, you know, always educated. That's one thing that the Banks has always strived on, was education, especially educating the girls. And also on the Randolph side, education goes way back, because Granddad Randolph's mother was a teacher, and you know, and he was very educated, went to college in the 30s. You know, my grandma Banks, she went to college in the 40s, and so you know, education is on both sides of the family. But the main thing that connected the Banks and the Randolph was church. You know, the belief in God and the belief in a higher being, and the core values that was laid down from the Bible that they instilled in all of their kids. So it was an easy transition for our families to make to join each other. Some families don't mesh because of this. So it was one of the things that drew our families together, was our strong beliefs and our strong sense of family. When I was growing up, I really didn't play with a lot of toys. You know, they nicknamed me the old man right off the bat. So I always, you know, I just didn't have toys. I didn't play with it. When I wanted something, like on my 11th or 12th birthday, I received a lawnmower, a push mower, and an edger for my birthday. You know, and then, you know, I would want things like baseball gloves and things that pertain to the things that I was doing. I wouldn't necessarily have bicycles and G.I. Joes and all those kind of toys that the rest of the kids were playing with. I was on a different level as far as that. Well, at least I thought I was, you know, because I just wasn't into all the basic gadgets that a lot of kids wanted. I didn't want that. I was always different on that. So, you know, I can entertain myself. I love to read. I got a job at the library very early. I planted my first garden when I was 8 years old in Daly City in the backyard, and I grew corn and all that kind of stuff at 8. So, you know, I was always into that type of stuff, you know. So I really didn't have a lot of toys, you know.
Okay. Did you have an allowance at any point?
Yeah, I had allowance early on because unfortunately my father left when I was about 6 years old, and then having Norman there, who was a little bit challenged, and then Dave and Doug was at a very young age, so I took on the male responsibility role in the house, and I was washing dishes and cooking and doing a lot of things at 6 and 8 years old that put me in a leadership position. So my mother would pay me as, because I was actually, doing a lot of work, but, I did receive allowances, and then I had a Christmas club, so I would take my allowance and I would put the $1 into the First National Bank, and then at the end of the year you have your $52 or whatever it is, and then you go Christmas shopping or whatever, so that's what I use my allowance. To be honest, it everybody wants to have a mom and a dad in the house. Let's be honest about that. But if the situation is not a good situation, then sometimes it's best that it's not that way. But I never, ever, ever held it against my father for leaving, nor have I ever held it against my mother for them splitting up. I just figured that was just a circumstance, and it didn't bother me in the least because I was into what I was doing, you know what I mean? And then I had enough support around me in other areas that, it didn't affect me significantly. I know it affected me, of course it did, but, it could have been a lot worse. To the point where I was unhappy about it, that was not the case. Especially early on, I went to Paul Revere, and I remember early on going against this girl named Monique. She was a little Oriental girl, and she was really fast, and we had these math drills, and it would always be me and her, me and her, me and her, and she would always beat me. She would always beat me because she was a little bit faster than me. We had to write, the teacher give you a thing, you write it on the board or spelling, but it was me and her always going neck and neck until one day when the mayor of San Francisco, Mayor ARandVideo, came to our school, and he comes to our school, and then they wanted some students to get up and demonstrate, and they picked me and Monique, just like always. But when the mayor came, I beat her for the first time ever.
In what?
In writing, the teacher would give us math problems, and we would have to write it on the board and see, that was the contest, or spelling or something like that. But for the first time, I beat Monique, and that was when the mayor became there, because she got nervous because the mayor was there and she choked up. And then that was about the time I realized that emotions play a role in different things, and I recognized that. And it helped me later on in life too, and other things, When I was in the college, we were in a college bowl, and the same thing happened when the lights went on. The crew from San Francisco, USF, the lights got them, and they froze, and I was able to, keep my composure. So from that instance in first or second grade, when Mayor ARandVideo came to our school, and that kind of let me know that I had a composure. I always knew I was smart, and I knew that I loved to study, so, school was good for me. I had a good time in school, even though we were in a period of the 60s where it was real turbulent racial times, and we had a lot of teachers who wanted to put us in a certain category as black people, and I would always have my books and my knowledge from my family, the Randolphs and the Banks, about black history, and I would always get in trouble because I would always expound these thoughts that they weren't teaching us, and I would get into arguments and debates with these teachers about black history because they didn't want to hear it, frankly. They wanted to hear their history. They didn't want to hear our history, because in the 60s there was no black history taught. So I got in a few trouble. I got one teacher fired for calling me a nigger in the 7th grade, because he tried to tell me that, I would be a slave 100, he asked me this hypothetical question, like, because he was upset, but I didn't realize he was upset with me. I thought he was asking me a normal question. He was like, what would you have been 100 years ago? And then I was thinking to myself, I'm like, 100 years ago, there was no cars. I said, I probably would have been a blacksmith. And then he just yells at me, no, you would have been a slave. I said, a slave? I said, no, you would have been a slave. And then he starts ranting, and that's when I realized the animosity that he had toward me. And then I said, well, I would have been a runaway slave. Then he just goes off and calls me a nigger, and I just get up and I walk to the principal's office, and he was fired the next day. But it was just some of the things that I had to deal with, and even going down to Delhi and Livingston, when I went down there, I had a lot of battles down there because they were so ignorant and didn't really understand black people, and they were trying to pigeonhole me as an athlete and not as a student. And then when I had verbal skills, I was on the debate team and on the yearbook staff and all this type of stuff. Some of them resented me for that because they just wanted me to be AB, you know, running up and down the football field or hitting home runs or going to the hoop. And they didn't want me debating them on serious subjects, which I had an upper hand on because I was from the city and they were from the country. And you know, I had to make sure of both worlds, whereas they never experienced the city, so that left them a little bit of a void when it came to debating me. I went to Paul Revere, kindergarten to third grade, and then we moved over to on Shotwell Street, and I went to a school on Army Street, which is now Cesar Chavez. It was called LeConte at the time, but now it's been changed to Leonard R. Flynn.
That's elementary?
It's elementary. I went there in the third grade. And then after that year, we moved to Daly City. We moved up on Crocker, and I was going to George Washington over there. And then we moved down, after that, we moved down on Woodrow Street. And then I was going to Woodrow Wilson School. I went there until the sixth grade, and then I graduated from elementary, went on to Coma, and it's now Policita, named after our principal. His name was Policita, so that they changed the name to, you know, and then I went there. And then in the eighth grade, I graduated and I was moving on to high school. And at first I attended Westmore because I played baseball for Mr. King, and Mr. King was trying to get me to go to Westmore because they were a better baseball school. But someone told that I lived in the Serramonte district, so I had to end up going to Serramonte. And I ended up at Serramonte High. About the middle of my, I believe it was my freshman year, I got in some trouble and was doing, you know, hanging out with the wrong crowd, as they say. And I ended up going back to San Francisco to live with my dad. I moved to 81 Margaret, and then I ended up going to James Lick. And that was a good experience for me because me and Val, my favorite cousin, we were the same age, you know.
And Val is who?
Val is my father's sister Cecilia's daughter, and she's number 5 on the chain. There's 37 of us first cousins, and I'm number 4, and Val is number 5. And we were Valing out all the way coming through. We went to James Lick, and then after we graduated, so I actually graduated from junior high twice. I graduated from Colma in the 8th grade, and then I went to Serramonte for half the year. When I moved to San Francisco, I went back to junior high, ended up graduating again from James Lick, because they went in San Francisco, they went to school to the 9th grade. It was only 3 years of high school. So, and I was supposed to go to Balboa, which we had legacy there because my dad went there. He's in the Hall of Fame there. Adam Banks, my uncle, he was a star there, and a star also at City College. He went there. So all of our family came through. Dr. Floyd Banks, my uncle, they all went to Balboa.
Philip went there?
Yeah, Phil, yeah. And but Balboa was in such disarray at the time. It was just not a good fit for me, so I decided to go to Daly City, to school, to Serramonte, which was a new school, brand new. They had modular scheduling. They treated us like college students. We had, you know, only Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, and 2-hour breaks in between. You know, it was just like getting us prepared for college. It was indoors. They had 2 gyms. It was fabulous, you know, and we had a great sports legacy up there. And so I enjoyed my time there. But also, you know, when I was living, when my mother was remarried, and she married Russell Williams, and me and Russ didn't get along that well, you know, for different reasons that I don't care to get into, but we just didn't, you know. So I ended up moving down to Delhi and living with my grandparents, Randolph, Roberta, and Elijah, and turned out to be probably the best move I ever made.
And what grade?
I went down there, I was 16, so I was a junior. I went down there the summer before my junior year. And that junior year probably was the best year in sports. I know it was my best sports year, and it was the best year academically and all that, because I was focused and I was, you know, down there. It was like isolation, you know, not too much stuff to get into, so that, you know, you have to do your work. And then it makes you appreciate the things that you left behind. So I went to Livingston High School and played sports down there, and had some pretty good relationships and some friends to this day that I still have from Livingston. And then after that, and then during the summers I went to Stanislaus State in the Upper Brown program, so I lived in the dorms all summer long and actually got college units for going to this program. So when I went to college, I already had most of my general ed classes taken. And then I went to